Welcome to the Triskele podcast.
We are three druids gathered in a virtual grove
to share our thoughts and our path with you.
Hi, welcome to episode 6 of the Triskele podcast. If you're a new viewer, welcome. And if you are a returning viewer, welcome back. Thank you very much for coming back and watching and listening to us one more time. So let's start with introductions. And I'm Victoria, and my pronouns are she and her.
I'm Drum, and my pronouns are he and him.
And I'm Amber. My pronouns are she and her.
And today we are going to talk about offerings and how we use offerings, what we use for offerings, and we'll have a few visitations by felines because there are many of them in Drum's house at the moment. If we're lucky, there'll be a dog as well. Who knows? We'll see. To start out, I know since I'm cheating because I know a little bit about both of your practices because we often talk about them. Do you use offerings in your practice and how do you use them? I guess actually, let me back up. What does offerings mean to you?
Look at us all being like, it's Friday and I'm trying not to do the Zoom like, oh, no, no.
Did you want to start over?
No.
Okay.
I'm okay with it. They can hear my, or I can cut this whole section out. I edit
Exactly.
this. I can do whatever I want. Anyways, offerings are essentially a gift that are given to somebody else. It could be ancestors, it could be nature spirits, it could be deities, but essentially our goal within ADF at least is to build reciprocal relationships, a give and take type of bond. And so we give gifts to them so that we can receive gifts in return. So that's what offerings are to me.
I'm going to go along those same lines. I mean, offerings are gifts that we give. We give offerings so that we may receive offerings. And when I give offerings, I don't really care about the return flow, honestly. It's just I feel that it's something that I should do. I do daily workings, which we've talked about here before, and offerings are a part of it. And I think that there's a difference between offerings and sacrifices, but offerings are the gifts we give.
So I also do offerings on a regular basis. Actually, I'll go ahead and show it. I was showing folks off. I have this little cute box that has incense in it. I don't know if anybody can see it. We'll put a better picture in. And basically what I do is I take a pinch of incense and I put it on my incense burner. I have an electric incense burner. Modern technology is wonderful. And let that just sort of, let the scent permeate the rite that I'm doing, as well as sort of waft up to whoever I'm doing the rite with. I look a lot, to me, offerings are a lot like, if your friend comes over, you're going to offer them a drink. You're not going to let them just, not have anything to drink because you want to be hospitable and nice. And so this is the same sort of thing. I'm inviting these beings into my space. I'm going to offer them something in return that hopefully they will find of value.
And when I say gift, that's kind of what I mean. Like sometimes that gift is purely just the relationship that you're building with each other, a presence of them in your practice and in your life. I mean, to me, that is a gift that they're giving to us by being aware of us and a part of our interactions. So I love the metaphor of them being guests in your home and offering them a drink. I mean, when you do that with your friends, it's not because you expect that when you go to their house, they're going to give you a drink. It's because you like these people and you want them to be happy and you want to have a good relationship. So here, have a drink. Like,
right.
It really is right practice. It's the right thing to do. And those relationships are important. And sometimes those offerings are somewhat intangible. Whereas other times, sometimes they're verbal, sometimes they're physical, sometimes they're mental, but they can have many forms, and I think that they're all vital.
Well, and not only is it the right thing to do, but it's the hospitable thing to do. And I know in my practice, hospitality is a really important part of that. I mean, I work really closely with Hestia, so I think that it's not optional. Um, but it is something that is really, really important in my practice to be a good guest and to be a good host.
Yeah, for me, it's hospitality is huge, right? I mean, I don't want to go over to somebody's house if they're not going to be hospitable. Why would any being want to join me in my space if I'm not going to be hospitable? I mean, really, does a god really need to show up? Does a nature spirit really need to show up? No, they don't. They really don't. They could care less. So unless I'm being nice, why would they show up?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I always like to think that hospitality is our greatest virtue because it's the one virtue that requires someone other than ourselves. We can be wise, we can be courageous, we can, you know, be moderate, but in order to be hospitable, there has to be at least one other entity.
That's a very good point. Now, Drum, before you mentioned that offerings and sacrifice are different, shall we unpack that a little bit?
Sure. I think that it's really a question of context. I mean, in an ADF rite, we give offerings up to a certain point, and then we have what we call the prayer of final sacrifice, where we make this big boom boom sacrifice that's supposed to commemorate the creation of the cosmos. And so I think that's an offering that's really magnified in some way, either by quantity or by intent, or in some way. I think that sacrifice is, something that's maybe something greater than a normal offering. If I have a fire and I put incense in the fire, or I put whiskey in the fire, I consider that an offering. If I have something that's really important to me, like a photograph of my grandparents or whatever the case may be, or a toy that I've had for a long time, and I put that in the fire, something that I can never replace, that's a sacrifice. That's something that's gone forever, that was of great value to me and is now a gift to the gods. So I think that's the difference. I think sacrifices are hard to replace, or I think offerings are not as hard to replace.
I mean, admittedly, I tend to avoid using the term sacrifice purely because it has such a negative connotation. Um, when you say the word sacrifice, people automatically assume that you're doing like animal or human sacrifices, or that is the visual that comes to people. And so when you're doing something like a public ritual where people aren't familiar with your practice or don't necessarily know what it is you're doing, the word sacrifice can be really scary. So if it's just me, I'll use whatever I want to use. That's fine. But in public, personally, I tend to avoid the term just because I don't want to make people concerned that I'm like going to sacrifice a guinea pig or something. And that's not, it's not what we're doing. We're not doing that type of activity, but that's the terminology that was used. And that's the visual that it tends to bring along with it sometimes.
So I'm on a number of Discord chats or Discord channels that have new pagans, and a lot of them get really hung up on this idea of sacrifice being something that has to really hurt to lose. And I disagree. And I also agree. I think that sacrifice, as we've sort of discussed, and I agree with Drum, that a sacrifice needs to be something that's hard to replace. A sacrifice needs to hurt a little bit. The one sacrifice that I've made was I made a blanket. I had asked Freya for some assistance on a personal matter, and I offered a votive offering of a blanket. So I made a full-size blanket by hand. So this is like not sewn. This was woven and crocheted, and wrapped it up with a towel and some soap and put that out where I knew some houseless folks were. And with a note on it to say, please take it if you need it. that was a lot of time and effort going into that thing, all with this intent of, this personal thing that happened, that actually did happen, which is why the votive offering was being made. But most of what I do, you saw my box of incense. It's a box of incense that I go down to the store and I buy some more incense and I put incense in it. It's done intentionally, so there's that added non-physical component to it, but it's still something that doesn't hurt to lose. And we will often say, I've heard, I think all of us say at some point, water is a great offering. It is the thing that we have to have. We can't survive long without water. And so it becomes like, I heard somebody saying something and they were doing an offering of water and it was like from my cup to your cup. And that idea of like, this is something that in our modern world, it doesn't hurt to lose. In other parts of the world, it does hurt to lose. And so it would take on a different connotation there. But like the day-to-day, I'm just being nice, we're just being hospitable, that's not necessarily a sacrifice. And I wish people would stop using the word sacrifice for that. Right. Because that's not what it means.
Well, the word sacrifice actually means to make sacred. So, I mean, that's what it means. So, despite my hangups about what it feels like it means, that was the intent behind the word, is you're taking something out of this realm and you're making it now a sacred object. You can't get it back. You can't bring it back to the mundane. It is now sacred. It goes over there. Bye. It's gone.
Your point is very valid, though, the whole idea of sacrifice and the negative connotations that go behind it. Usually when I do a pre-ritual briefing, I explain that the gift of final sacrifice has to do with, recreating the cosmos, and we commemorate the creation of the cosmos by the sacrifice that went into creating the cosmos. But that's the one word, as Victoria said, that really gets people. It's like sacrifice. Oh no. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a tough one. Offering is a good word.
Yeah, it works.
And for carbon-based life forms, water is wonderful.
Yes. If we've met silicon-based life forms, let me know, because that'd be kind of cool.
Right.
But I know in my daily rite, so if I do weekly rituals, I'll do I don't always, but when I do an ADF core order ritual, that includes that prayer of sacrifice component. And it's just usually a bigger offering. Right, with a bit more intent about it, but it's just usually a bigger offering. It's not like I'm not pouring a $150 bottle of scotch into a fire. Right? I mean, maybe I would if there was something big enough that I wanted help with. But just to say hi? No, not really.
Yeah, usually when I do the gift of the prayer of final sacrifice, I mention the other offerings that have kind of come up to this point. So I kind of like roll through the offerings as a precursor to these. But yeah, it is kind of a different thing.
Kirk Thomas actually has a book that's all about like offerings and sacrifice and stuff. Mm-hmm. I think, is it called Sacred Gifts?
I believe so.
Yes.
It's really, really great. And I mean, Kirk's a pretty stellar dude, so that helps. But, that was one that when I started looking, it happened to get published as I was starting the clergy training program. So it was a really interesting time to kind of dive into the idea of offerings and what they are and what they mean as I was starting to sort of explore my own spirituality on a deeper level and what that means for the community. So.
Yeah, it showed up right as I was working on, I forget which course. It was a course that I had to talk about sacrifice. And I was like, and here's the perfect book.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great book. Nice. Kirk also is very skilled in making offerings and sacrifices. Mm-hmm. So
If I
Yeah,
had a stone circle like his, I'd have lots of practice. It's really freaking awesome. For folks who don't know who we're talking about, because not everybody probably does. Kirk Thomas is a former archdruid of ADF and our current preceptor. And he and his partner have a half Buddhist, half Druidic retreat center up on the south part of Washington State called Trout Lake Abbey. And it's amazing. I've been there a few times. It is absolutely phenomenal. They also have an organic farm and these huge sunflowers that are amazing. It's a beautiful space.
if you watch some of our high day rituals on YouTube, you can actually see some of the different spaces he has throughout some of those videos, because he does like to participate now and again. So,
and he's actually done some videos on his own YouTube channel showing off that space. Although more of his rituals, I'm sure, will be indoors because it gets a little chilly.
I know one of the offerings that sometimes in ADF rites gets talked about a little bit is the silvering of the well. And there's the question of, can I reuse this offering? Can I put this silver dime in the offering and then use it again next week? And I mean, I think that's a very personal question, and it goes kind of the heart of what is an offering. When you give a glass of water to your guest or a glass of whatever, you do wash the glass when you're done, but you don't put the water back in the bottle.
But I think the point there is, what are you actually doing? So at that point in the ritual, it's about hallowing the well.
Right.
But silver and copper actually have antimicrobial effects. So putting a piece of silver in water purifies it. So if that's what you're doing, then it's not an offering.
That's true.
it's a tool.
It's a tool.
Right. I've taken to using colloidal silver, which is liquid based, and dropping a few drops of colloidal silver into the well because it's silver. It's liquid and it dilutes very nicely. And it's not, so that's one
Honestly,
way of.
I think that it really does all come down to intent. Is your purpose of putting the silver in the well to make an offering to the well, or is it to purify and hallow it? If it's an offering, it's an offering. It needs to stay there.
Right.
But if it's a tool to cleanse the water, who's to say the tool can't be reused? So
Right.
I think that's where that gets really complicated, is not everybody sees that as the same thing.
Right, exactly.
Again, the joys of ADF and our orthopraxy instead of orthodoxy.
Yeah. In my old Protogrove, we actually used one of my rings because we didn't have any silver one day, and I had a ring on that apparently was okay to go. But in that case, we purify the well. The same piece of silver gets reused over and over and over and over. When there were different people doing ritual, we did make offerings. One of the reasons we stopped making offerings, though, to the well specifically, was because what do you do with all that silver? We could throw it into the river, but that doesn't seem like it's really nice. We could bury it. I mean, none of us had access to somebody who could smelt it down, and a lot of it, there was a lot of like dimes and stuff in there, so it wasn't even real silver.
In when I was in a grove, we found these like little tiny, I think they were actually intended to make like belly dance, the skirts. Just little tiny silver pieces. They look like coins though. So we took to using those because they were tiny. But then we carried the water from ritual to ritual. So we would fill a jar with some of the water to put back into the well each time for that continuous connection. But we started keeping all of the little tiny pieces of silver in that jar as well. So there was a whole jar of silver essentially kept with the water. And so we were using it as an offering, but that was how we got by. We weren't using big old hunks of stuff.
That's kind of cool. I like the colloidal silver idea as well, because
Mhm.
that disperses in a way that it shouldn't be harmful. I don't think it's
Right.
harmful.
You can
You know,
ingest it, so it's fit for human consumption. And
the question is not us; it's wherever we pour it out.
right,
We can ingest salt too, but we shouldn't sprinkle that on the ground.
no,
At
that's
least
true.
not near any trees or plants.
Right.
That leads to, I mean, kind of another question though. Like, what do you do with your offerings when you make them in a ritual? Like, okay, I poured whiskey in a cup and I'm in the woods. Now what? Where does it go? What do you do with it?
I try to be cognizant of the fact that I'm going to take my offerings and pour them outside. So I rarely use spirits um, in a liquid form that I'm going to pour out. If I have the luxury of a fire, then I can put it in the fire and it burns away. But the rest of the stuff, I want it to be in a form that I can pour on the ground. For example, if I have wine or olive oil or milk or honey or pure water, then I have no problem with pouring that on the ground because I don't think it's going to hurt anything. So for me, if it's grain or things of that don't burn, then I return them to the earth.
For me, it depends very much on where I am and what I'm doing. I live 10 floors above a very busy urban or city street. So
Except this offering.
For those who can't see what I just did, I made a gesture of throwing water like over a balcony.
it's possible that some of the liquids that are not harmful to people may be chucked over the balcony, because by the time it gets to the bottom, it's all in little droplets anyway. But for physical offerings, I collect them in a bowl and then they get thrown out. There's a prayer that I say. I think it came out of the Hearthkeeper's Way, actually, to just basically say, look, I'm done with, thank you for taking the essence of the offerings, so that I'm not just chucking them in the trash, but they will go either in the compost or the trash, depending on what they are. Most of them are compostable, and that's sort of how I deal with it. But they stay on my altar for at least 24 hours. So that the spirits can get all of the essence out of them.
Yeah. I just know that's one of those questions that we tend to get a lot from people as they join ADF. And it's essentially your situation. I live in an apartment. I want to make offerings. What do I do with this stuff? I can't throw it over the balcony. So, I mean, there's been some really interesting
throw
ideas.
it over the balcony. They yell at us if they catch us.
That's what I like about water or spirits as offerings, is the evaporative nature of them. They're consumed, they just get consumed and then they're gone. It's like, wow, it's magic. It's also physics, but nonetheless it works pretty well.
Who says physics isn't magic? I mean, really, chlorophyll.
Absolutely.
Plants getting their food with chlorophyll is science, but that's still pretty freaking magical.
It's very magical. It's awesome.
I will say one thing that I found interesting, because I do tend to leave offerings on my altar for a while. If I leave fruit or bread, it doesn't go bad. Like, it'll dry out, but it just dries out. That's it. That's like, I don't have to deal with mold and stuff. It's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It is. I know growing up, I was always fascinated at the Buddha altars in Chinese restaurants, and they always had fruit on them. So I think that's a very interesting methodology that they use, and I like your comment about that it doesn't go bad. When I put fruit on my altar, it tends to desiccate after a while, and it can be there forever. It's like the offering. Keeps giving.
I'm a little surprised it's not consumed by your feline companions.
It's just high enough where it would take an effort.
So I'd say, if it left your altar, I wouldn't be surprised in your house.
Right. Yeah, they do like those things. They're just redistributing the offerings.
Well,
they deserve them too. House spirits and
Right.
you leave out, food for the nature spirits and the birds come and eat it. Cool.
Right. We do have a compost pile, and sometimes the offerings do go into the compost pile, and they do oftentimes, because of just neighborhood critters, they get consumed. So what a joy. Our offerings are the gift that keep on giving.
So I think that's probably about it for now. I mean, we can talk about this kind of stuff and go into more in depth of what offerings to give to which deities and which spirits and how to give offerings. But maybe we'll save that for another episode. So if you, I think we're going to be done here. And if Drum is going to give us a reading for the next few weeks.
I will. So, our first oem, I'll say that this one comes from the ancestors, is Muin is the vine, and is the gift of prophecy. So I think that what this asks us to do is to look to those prophetic moments in our lives where insights and intuitions come to us. We see those all the time. We oftentimes dismiss them. So be aware of them. The nature spirits give us the ash tree, the world tree. How appropriate. The ash tree, the world tree, really connects the heavens and the earth. And I think talk about the connection between what happens above us and what happens here on earth, and sometimes the interaction that goes there, how the gifts of the shining ones shine down upon us here on the earth, and the gifts from the ancestors kind of also rise up to us, and we find ourselves in that middle realm. Finally, the shining ones give us, where is it? There it is. It's Alim, silver fir. And this gives us high sight and long view. It tells us to look towards the end. It looks towards the far road. Don't get lost in the forest. Try to see beyond the trees to the end of the forest and approximate that which is to come. So take the long view. So be aware of the prophecies in your life. Look for the interconnectedness in the world that we find here in the middle realm, and take the long view on things. Those are the insights for the next 2 weeks.
I think that's a good omen.
I think so too.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for joining us, and we will see you again in a few weeks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
bye.
Thank you for joining us for today's video. If you like this episode, be sure to like and subscribe. You can also find more episodes on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast providers. You can find us on social media on Facebook and Twitter, or for more information, visit our website, triskelepodcast.weebly.com.